Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending Improving's March 5th virtual lunch and learn. We are thrilled to have you join us today. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that will make the session much more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present Daniel Scheifler, who is a software developer at Improving. Today, Daniel will be sharing a webinar entitled, Helping Your Waterfall Flow Faster. The floor is all yours, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Sherwin. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us with this Improving virtual lunch and learn. As Sherwin has mentioned, this will be on helping our waterfall flow faster. And so naturally, our agenda will be rather water themed. Our first set will be discussing, could your stream flow faster? And talking about some of the indications where there's an opportunity for improvement, and especially dealing with some of the emotional frustration that can come from watching a waterfall flow very slowly. Our next step will be, to quote Bruce Lee, flow like water, finding ways to flow around the systems to still produce the kind of change that you want to see. And then last, we'll take all of that, what you've learned, and bring it down to brass tacks as we look for the eventual destination of all waterfalls and rivers, and especially the fast kind, the sea. Now, before we get too far, I do want to mention that there will be a couple of spots in this presentation where we will be handling questions or audience prompts. You'll see this little Q symbol up above my head, which will be a prompt saying, hey, your queue is coming up, or that's your queue, which will be the moment where I'm actually opening up for audience participation. We'd love to hear your thoughts and especially your questions as we get towards the end. Now, of course, before I get too much further, who am I? Well, my name is Daniel Scheifler. I'm a Christian, a husband, a father, and most recently an improver, listed in order of importance. I work for Improving, and I'm out of our Houston office. Go Houston. But it is my pleasure to represent Improving in this manner, because a lot of what I'll talk about is fundamental in our culture. One of the quotes I try and bring to every client I work with is to see with eyes unclouded, to see the truth for things for what they are, and not to bring my own preconceptions and especially my own prejudices into the judgment of what is. And it's through that quote that a lot of the content for this presentation has come out. So let's start with, of course, the most important piece. Why is my stream so slow? Well, a couple of things you might want to look for. Are the requirements listed that you're getting from the business a list of demands, the system shall? Or is it more of a conversation? Well, we'd like to be able to, between the development and the business. A lot of times that's the first major hurdle, that what we treat our requirements as very much kind of sets the tone for the relationship between development and the business. And if the business is certain that this is what they want, it isn't a conversation. It's just a list of, this is what you shall do for me. And so it's now a negotiation on price. That's not as much as we would like it for to be agile. And so it becomes very typical of what can happen in waterfall cultures. Okay, well, what about your project? Are you assuming that the thing you're building is in fact the one true path? Or is it more like a guess? We're betting that this is a better direction for us to go, so we're going to spend X amount of dollars to make a bet and to learn. And again, this is another one of those project insight questions. You'll find that in the more waterfall-y projects, the assumption is that we knew where we were to go. In the agile projects, very often it is a sense of we don't know for certain, but we have a good guess. And there's a willingness to make mistakes and to learn from them. That's why we have that fail fast mentality. But if you're seeing a lot of the, we know what we're doing, it can be an opportunity for improvements. And then lastly, and this one is one of the most peculiar questions to ask, but do the developers have the ability or the permission to just go talk to the people who are using their software? Very oftentimes I'll find that in very hierarchical organizations, which often go hand in hand with waterfall development cycles, there's no way for the developer to talk to their users. Not because like they don't know who they are, but like in order to get there, there's the project management. And then there's the requirements, third party who's coming in to go and actually gather them. And then there's the business product owner, project manager type person. And then maybe you can get to an actual business user for this software. But that's 3 layers of people you kind of need to wiggle your way through to actually get face to face with someone who uses that product on a day-to-day basis. And especially for Agile, if the developers don't have the ability to just ask questions, there is now this longer delay cycle between getting things done in an answer for what they need to do today. It encourages a kind of stagnation. Well, I can't really talk to them anyway, so I'll just take the requirements I get. And if they got the requirements wrong, that's on them. And that attitude has a very significant impact on whether or not the culture, even the individual interactions, can behave with agility, or if they must go in this large, long, iterative cycle that we call waterfall. So with all of this in mind, I want to take a brief moment to talk about one of the big concepts in Agile, MVP, also called minimum viable product. Now, for you sports fans, I know you wanted it to mean most valuable player. We're going to have to pivot here. But that actually presents one of the easiest points about MVP. There's a lot of confusion in it. It is a big deal in Agile. But what does it mean? Very often the business will have one definition of it, the project management will have a third, maybe the people who are, underwriting the project as far as money goes have a fourth, and then of course development has a very strong idea of what it really means. And of course development is right? Not so much. For my part, I believe that the MVP often should be boiled down to the minimum effort increment necessary to learn enough to iterate for a next step. Because Agile is not just for software, it's about a lot of these other things. But that's what I prefer. That's not necessarily what it actually is, the MVP of Agile. Right? So MVP is big in Agile, but what happens if we try and apply this concept now to the system itself? What would it look like to produce a minimum viable product for agility? And of course, this is now a moment where I would love to hear your thoughts and to have a little bit of a conversation with you.
All right, Daniel, you got an answer, and then you have an additional question.
Fantastic.
The answer to the question you just asked is having a minimum structure necessary to deliver a result.
Yeah, I could definitely see that MVP for agility might be the minimum structure necessary to produce the pivots and to flex and to grow around, I need to actually deliver results so that I can learn. And very important is that so I can learn. Good answer. What about that question, Sherman?
So the question you have is from Christopher. He asks, how does long-term planning play into this? Doing things we committed to a year or more ago that way may not be the most valuable any longer.
So Christopher, that is actually a very good question. And it is in fact one of the known weaknesses in many of the Agile systems for long-term planning. So I wanted to draw attention to one of the assumptions in long-term planning. Commitments, knowns, decisions. In order to plan, you're making a decision that this is the path I want to go down. Agile is not so much a system which prevents you from planning. It is supposed to be the tactical steps and the systems and processes necessary to make those work so that you can take the steps between here and there effectively. And ideally, as you take each of those steps to deliver true value rather than delaying it from when I made the plan to when I actually get there. And so I think, and please submit a follow-up question on this if I've made the wrong guess. When you're asking, how do I incorporate planning into Agile? Because if I'd made a commitment a year ago, well, I'll offer a couple of questions. One, are the things you committed to a year ago still relevant? If the answer is yes, fantastic. Do you know all of the steps you have to take to get there? I would be willing to bet the answer should be no. You know most of them, but not every one of them. And that's where Agile helps to fill in. Agile talks about what steps do I take? And so the first step you would think of in your broad plan, you would submit into an Agile process of this is the next step, our next experiment. How do I get something valuable out of that? And if your steps aren't set up like that, maybe turn it back where you have what in Toyota has been referred to as Hoshin Kanri. You take from the broad goals and bubble them down and then bubble them back up with feedback from the actual on the ground to provide modification on the plans. We still take the goal, but we produce a new path to get there that provides us value in the meantime.
Yeah, you got a couple more responses. Christopher mentioned the minimum needed to learn.
Minimum needed to learn is a fantastic option. And again, it draws attention to that you had to have delivered something in order to learn, just like a test. I have to evaluate whether I did it right. That's a good answer.
You have another one that says having only the number of people truly necessary for the process to work.
I like this answer, and it actually encourages a follow-up question. Having the minimum people necessary, like the minimum team, is often a really great thought. But how far does that go? Like, what is the actual minimum number of people you'd need on a group to start an agile process? So, Shervin, do we have any more coming in, or shall I proceed?
We got one more. It says delivering enough to users to get feedback.
Delivering enough to users to get feedback. Yes, this is focusing on that core value for Agile, which is I have produced something of value and I am getting information back to learn. And as long as that's incorporated with the understanding that I'm going to now use what I learned to go produce, again, something for the users to create that cycle. And I love these answers. They are fantastic. But I want to take a moment, if you're willing, come back with me to that question about the minimum number of people. And just ponder that for a moment. Truly, what is the minimum number of people you can get away with? And note, I'm saying people here, not roles, because after all, for example, in Scrum, you're supposed to have a self-organizing team that has all the necessary skills and authority to make decisions to deliver product. But how many people is that really? I would submit to you that it actually provides us insight to the MVP of agility, which incorporates a lot of the elements we've heard so far. I would submit that the MVP of agility is one person caring enough about service to someone else, producing value to someone else, to actively go and solicit work from that person. Because after all, if we don't solicit work, our system starts with nothing and ends with nothing. And upon completing that work, to seek feedback on that from the other person to make certain we delivered value. Because if you miss either of those elements, to actively seek to serve and to verify that the service was in fact rendered, it's not a process. It's a once and done, and it does not produce the continued value, the continued learning that is core and central to agility. Now, if you boil that out, MVP, it looks like service. Well, not looks like, it is service. Now here, I want to clarify when I say service here, I am not talking about just customer service, where it is simply to, say, yes, sir, may I take your order, sir? It's more than that. The best analogy I have to draw is the way in which Henry Ford would refer to service when he was building the Ford Motor Company. And here he was driving himself and the design of his cars to not only be the best cars, but to provide the best service. They would last the longest. They would provide the best value. They would be so cheap that anyone else with a reasonable income could buy them. These were the services that the Ford Motor Company sought to provide with the original Model T. And this pervaded the entire way in which he produced his product. In the same way, I submit that the MVP of agility is that concept of service. How can I make it so that it is most useful, most, not necessarily just convenient, but most effective for the expenditure of resources to get product? Now, very often when I share this, the exact next statement is but. But that's not how my company works. They won't listen to me, but I've already told them. Or, but I'm not in charge. You know what? Truth of the matter is, yeah. Very often the people who can see the opportunity for the value of agility aren't in charge. Very often they have probably already told the company or the executives that they work most closely with, this is the way, and they were ignored. Very often, it's very true that when you see the need for this, your company is not presently working in as agile a manner as it could. And truth be told, agile is not the solution to all the problems. And that's okay. But that doesn't mean you get an excuse not to keep going, right? Just because you've already told them doesn't mean you should stop. Just because that's not the way the company works doesn't mean you can't find something that will help them better. Just because you're not in charge doesn't mean you can't affect change. And it's gonna take a shift here as well as here to be able to make the kind of change that's going to matter. Think about it, right? When we make the argument of, but my company's not agile, or they're not behaving in an agile manner, we're talking about any number of things. It could be their process is slow and steady wins the race. It could be that they don't favor individuals and interactions. They don't want conversations. They just want automatons doing the work. And you know what? Most of the time, those systems come about because they worked. And that is a bitter pill to swallow, especially when you want to produce something more and better and beyond. And that's okay. So the trick here will be to start with humility and to realize that last one, but I'm not in charge. Yeah. And so we're not going to be able to dictate solutions. Instead, we're going to have to demonstrate the value of doing things differently to them. We're going to have to start somewhere. And so I want to focus on that last piece, but I'm not in charge, but they won't listen to me. Okay. Start with what you control. There is exactly one and only ever one person in this entire world whom you can order about and will actually obey. Everyone else is making choices. That one person who you can order about and will actually obey with perfect accuracy, you. There's a whole number of sayings trying to remind you, be the change you want to see in the world. I'm not going to proclaim that I have a new fancy way to do it, because at the end of the day, that is what it boils down to. Are you willing to change first? And this is, at its core, the first and fundamental question in leadership. Are you leading you well? Because if you're not leading you well, no one else is going to follow you. So let's start with what we control. Let us start with ourselves and recognize that we can do so very much when we realize it is about our choices and it does not require others to move and to obey. So instead, we're going to change our mindset, and I encourage this, to focus on service. What does service look like? And so that's where I want to pivot to this conversation. From all of the things that agility could be, let's boil it down to its simplest, purest form: your service to one of your customers. And so I want to offer this kind of guiding question. What does that look like? Well, let's start simple. How are you engaging with your customers? Are you friendly, helpful, approachable? And perhaps even more fundamentally, let's start with, who are your customers? So take a moment to think, and I'll give you an example of how I derived the answer for my role. As Shervin mentioned, I'm one of the senior consultants with Improve, and I do on my daily basis software development. What do software engineers produce on a daily basis? Features? No, that's kind of a byproduct of the thing I do produce on a daily basis, because on a daily basis, I'm writing code. Who consumes code? Well, in a sense, the business users who hired me to develop software for them are consuming the byproduct of the code, which is features. They want the behavior of the code. Okay, that's one customer. The team lead I might be working for, he wants a set of features done as part of the productivity for his team. He also consumes the features, though in a slightly different fashion. But the code that I write, my customers there are myself in the future, because after all, I'll come back and read that code, or the developers who work with me on the team. And so they're my now third group of customers. And now I can ask that question. Am I friendly with the developers? Am I friendly with the business? Am I helpful with the business? Am Am I helpful to my team lead? Am I approachable to the business when they have a concern or they want a new feature? Am I approachable to those developers when they have a confusion? Because the nature of my interactions with them will either present opportunities for me to serve or will very rapidly close them off. Because if I go to solicit work, as I've mentioned, if I go to solicit work and no one's willing to say, no, we're good, we don't want you to work on anything, and I can only get it secondhand through requirements documents, my ability to affect change or to present a better way is limited by how well I can get things into the requirements document. But if I become a face people were willing and interested to talk to, that changes things. And note that I'm saying friendly and approachable here. These feel like soft things. Well, yeah, but isn't Agile supposed to be about software? I mean, that's certainly where we use it most frequently, but it's not bound to software. It's about a system of processes, a dictation of principles and values, individuals and interactions over, working code over. It's a series of encouraged choices, but Agile is not limited to just software because it talks about people, individuals and interactions. And very often it can get glossed over because I'll be honest, relationships are the hard part. You know, my job would be easy if it weren't for, you know, those 6 or 8 other people or even myself in the past, because I definitely knew how to do that right. Maybe. And so when I start talking about relationships, I want to talk fundamentally about building trust. This trust is what will allow the users eventually to be willing to take a bet on you. If you are friendly in the way that you interact with them, if you are approachable, and more importantly, if you are helpful and effective in helping them solve their problems or their concerns, that is, if you're providing good service, they will be more likely to call on you particularly when they have a question, because you're the guy they're comfortable with, or in this, or gal. And it comes down to whether or not you build trust. Now, to do this, there's a couple of things I really need to draw your attention to. First and foremost, be humble. This whole comment, but I'm not in charge. Yeah, embrace it. You can still lead when you're not in charge. In fact, there's a good book by that title. Be humble enough to recognize that it's not your call, and that will make it easier for you personally to serve, because it will become natural. Oh, right, I'm not in charge. My job here is to provide the service, to provide the tools, to provide the support to them for this next thing. And in order to do that well, I'll recommend also cultivate curiosity. You need to be curious about what they need and what they want. And then, of course, when you go to make recommendations, which is naturally going to be the thing you're going to be asked to do because you have a set of skills they don't have, check your intent on when you make an operation, when you talk to them. Are you there to really learn what they need? Are you actually being curious? Are you trying to understand, as opposed to simply find some argument that will allow you to say, no, this is the direction you need to go? People can smell that coming a mile away. They're very sensitive to being led when they don't want to be led. And so, check your intent. Make certain that your heart is in the right place when you're going to talk to them about, well, you see, the problem with that is, there will be those moments where you have to tell them, that's fantastic. I would love to do this for you. Our system can't support it. And now you can talk to them about the real things that you know in your work, but by presenting it that way, rather than saying, well, you know, you should do it like this instead, and then lead them away without revealing to them the problem. You're not treating them as an equal, and that will damage the trust you have with them. Now, a very natural next question on this will be, wait a minute. You're telling me that one guy can create a change in a massive waterfall culture that is not interested in what I have to say by being humble and curious? By changing the way in which I work, I can change all of that? You're kidding, right? Well, think about it. At the end of the day, the only person you ever had control over was you. And everything else comes down to your ability, for lack of a better term, to sell them on a change of ideas. What better way to sell someone than to produce the results they actually want by a different means? But this highlights one thing that I have to be very clear here. Yes, a single person can affect the change, but you see what's in his hands there? Tiny little mustard seeds. Seeds. Your actions today are seeds for your opportunities tomorrow. The phrase, there is an oak in every single acorn. You just got to give it time. And like with trees, there is that wonderful phrase on investing. When's the right time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Right now. So yeah, you may be buried with a bunch of things that cannot change. You're deeply embedded in a waterfall structure, or maybe management isn't seeing things the way you are. Okay. Start today by making the small investments in people, in relationships, in the capital you'll need to help them see there's something more, there's something better. The solutions we're presenting, again, are things that you can come up with on your own. It's not the grand spectacular plan. It's the equivalent of diet and exercise. And I know that's not fun. It's not the brand sparkly new thing, but it works. Oh, here's some of the things you can do to start planting those seeds. Ask holistic questions. This falls under the be curious piece. Don't just ask, so hold on, did you want that to be 3 long or 2 long? Or did you want it 20 characters in this field? Focus on what they actually care about. Show interest in more than just the work that you were handed. Ask, okay, that makes sense. And I think I understand what you're asking for. Can you help me to understand where that fits in this workflow? Ask where it fits in their world. Because remember, software is about creating value. It's not there for you to go write more code. Because quite frankly, the business doesn't care. They want the machine to behave in a certain way. So ask about the thing they care about, the behaviors, and how it works into this system. And very often, one of the first values you can provide in asking those holistic questions will be to ask about a case they didn't think about. But don't ask it in a way as a gotcha, or as a way to prompt them into some other solution you have. Ask them, honestly, okay, how should that work when? This means you're being more helpful because you're providing better value than simply doing. Now, there may be those occasions where they don't want that help. Be sensitive to it and hear it. This is part of the be humble. Balance out your willingness to be as helpful as you can and realize they may not want to buy all those services. Look for the opportunity to provide more service than they're directly buying when they're willing for it. But if they're not in that mood, or if you get the sense that I can't handle that right now, back off, because that truly is a better service to provide to them. To be gentle and, how shall we say, friendly and approachable when they're having a bad day. My favorite option in this, and it's one of those where, really, does that work? Yeah, be the friendly face. Just smile, darn it. After all, we're all remote right now, yeah? I miss getting to interact with my team physically, because there's a different sense to it. There's a wonderful joy in getting just to stand at a whiteboard and talk with someone through a problem. And you can't do that so well right now. But that has not for once changed the ability for you to be the friendly face within the organization. For every interaction you have on your part, make it as pleasant as it can be. There may be the giant production bug and everything is broken. And so they're stressed to the nines. But if you say, good morning, how may I help? That sets a very different tone. It immediately sets you up as, I'm still going to treat you as human. And yeah, there's this thing. And yes, we're going to work on it together. But like how you interact colors everything else in what you can do. Take that time to find a way to be ready to serve and to communicate it. As I just mentioned, good morning, how may I help? Is one of the ways I will open calls when I know my QA is calling me, because I want the dude to know I'm on his side. He's got a hard enough job catching bugs from developers all day anyway. So usually when he's calling me, it's something serious. Now, I'm not always really great at this, because there are days when I'm frustrated and I'm having a bad day. And so being the pleasant, that reminder in my head, Am I being the friendly face right now? Helps me to think and to catch when I can those mistakes that would otherwise cost me the relationship capital I'm building. My favorite one, especially when I've been talking to the business, because frequently now I'll be pulled into a requirements gathering meeting and they will be asking all manner of these questions. But as soon as I'm on the call and they acknowledge, hey, hi, Daniel, thank you for joining us. Hello, how may I be of service today? Because I want to tell them very seriously, I am here to be of service to you right now. That is my goal here. I'm not like, yeah, so what's the problem? Because, you know, that's a little brusque. It's a little harsh. I'm trying to set the tone of I am gentle. I am here to help. I am your friend as much as it can be. And if you do this frequently enough, you're going to build up that sense with them that maybe he really means it. Maybe he really is asking, how can he be of service? And I'll ask something a little more of him. And eventually someone will, as I mentioned earlier, take that bet by asking you, hey, Daniel, what should we do about this? Or, hey, Daniel, can you help us think through something? And that takes time. I've had recent success with this, but it took a year and a half to build the necessary relationship capital to be in the position where someone was willing to take the bet and I could make an impact. But I worked my tail off all that time to get to the one bet that could be made, and then to work my tail off again to make that one bet pay off so well for the person who made it that it became obvious that they were going to make the bet again. But again, I wasn't thinking on me. During this entire time, as I mentioned, I was busting my butt to try and get the work done and to prove that I was worth that trust. Because nothing builds trust like being able to deliver results. Being the friendly face, in order to get to the point where you're the friendly face, for it to mean something, you also have to deliver on what you promise, on what you say. So don't say, how may I be of service, if you're not willing to put your money where your mouth is, or in this case, put your effort where your mouth is. There have been moments where I really did not want to say it because I knew it was going to be a lot of work and a lot of pain. But I viewed the trade as worth enough that I said, okay, how may I be of service? And with that, one of the pieces I've recognized is necessary to really being the friendly face is not merely to say, how may I be of service? But they need to feel like you understand. What do you mean, like I understand? I speak English, they speak English. Well, kinda. You and I, as developers, might speak a version of English, and the business probably speaks a different one. We all call it English, but we mean completely different things when we say the same words. I mean, for example, right? How come in English there are three meanings to take out? There's to take someone out, as in boom. We don't want that. There's take out, like Chinese, which, man, I really wish I had some. And then there's like take them out on a date. All three of those come with the same two words, take out. Be mindful that when we speak, we may not be speaking the same language. And in particular, if you are a developer on this side of the organization, or you're a product owner on the side of the organization, avoid the jargon. Do not use tech speak, because that is the fastest way to really either glaze their eyes over or to completely lose them. Because the moment you start doing that, they cannot understand you. And so their trust built in you becomes inhibited. I don't know what he said, but I can't admit that out loud because that makes me look bad, or I don't want to look foolish. But I did not understand. So, especially as you talk with them about areas where your highest skill is, speak in a language that they themselves use as much as you can. It's hard. Almost as hard as being able to muster the courage to say, how may I be of service, and then mean it. But it is equally of value to set them up in a way where they can trust what you said because you spoke a language they did. And then lastly, seek the opportunities to serve. Look for simple ways to score a win for the customer. Like, not everything has to be about moving heaven and earth and realigning the stars. Which, don't get me wrong, all of the goals we want to may eventually get there. But how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Carve off a little piece, chew it, swallow, proceed. In the same way, look for the small wins, the small ways to produce actual value for them. Look for the things that are bothering them right now, right? Like, is that button on the UI frustrating because they click it and then nothing happens? Although, between you and me, in the background, we know it's technically going and calling this API that takes about a minute to run. Is there a way you could improve it for them? Like maybe a little ... animation? These are cheap. Like, seriously, a developer could do this in about 2 hours. Turn it in and done, and all of a sudden, their life is better. Didn't take a whole lot of work on my part. And there is that opportunity for service. It doesn't always have to be about massive scale or big expenditures or fancy prizes. It could be the simple little things like, hey, I noticed this door's a little sticky for you, so we tweaked it for you. It should now close and open smoothly, where you remove that little burr of pain from them. Sometimes they'll ask for something that's really, really, really complicated. If you pay attention to what they really need, if you are asking holistic questions, you'll stand a good chance to offer a way that could simplify it. Well, we couldn't get you all of that, but if you're willing to drop this little piece, I could get you 80% of it in about half the time. Is that something you'd like? But it's looking for those ways for them to score a win, and reducing the scope of something to half while still giving them the majority of what they want. That's a win. Set it up so that you and they are aligned on values that matter to them. Not change the way in which you deliver, because, you know, that would be weird, but be yourself in a way that is geared towards service. Help them by expending your talents on their behalf. And that can come in a variety of ways, but only if you're on the lookout for ways in which to serve. And kind of in combination with that, look for ways to say yes. I am particularly bad at this one. I freely admit that this is one of my challenges, because the way I look at the world, I can very clearly see we can do it, we cannot do it. And I am not hesitant to tell you that will not work. But when I'm trying to build a relationship with a customer, if all they hear is, nope, that won't work, nope, that won't work, they're going to eventually feel like I'm not really there trying to help them, despite the fact that my best efforts are being spent trying to get them a solution that will actually function. And so I have to monitor myself. I have to be asking, am I looking for the way to create the win for them? Am I looking for some way to be able to tell them yes to get them what they want, without having to tell them no for what we can't give them? With that, you have to be proactive to seek meaningful and effective feedback so that you create new opportunities to say, yes, we can do that. Because, for example, I went and changed that button and now it's a little ... and they say, yeah, that's great, but it goes like for forever. Can we get like something more? Now I have the opportunity to say, yes, we can. Here's what that might look like. Even though I want to say, no, because that'll be too expensive. We can talk about it. But my goal there is no longer to serve my preferences or what I think they want, which is to minimize their budget. I am providing service by allowing them to make a choice. I'm providing knowledge. But I have to go and create the circle so that I can create the new opportunities to continue to say yes. There's that common option in improv, yes, and, because you're trying to build on. Think of it in the same way here. We are trying to build a virtuous cycle. And so I must continue to add positive choices, good energy, good relationships. I know that sounded a little new agey there, but that really is what we're about here. Organizations are run on humans, not consuming them, but those are the people who are moving and flexing and causing the organization to prosper. If we're not serving them, and if we're not serving their psychological needs, we're not serving. And so it is acceptable to take the moment to look for what do they need beyond just they need the thing. Think about how they need the thing. Do they need it delivered by a certain deadline because that will make it the most impactful for them? Do they need it wrapped in a certain way so that it can look like it was their idea? All of these are valid, and all of these are ways to serve. So I want to now submit a question to you. How may I be of service to you today?
Daniel, we got one response. It says, you're saying that if I follow this advice, I can make my company agile.
I hate to give you the consultant answer, but honestly, it'll depend. And the most likely option is no, you cannot make your company agile. But insofar as you are part of your company and you begin to adopt and behave in agile manners, yes, you will have brought agility into your organization. Now, I want to be very careful in saying that, because all of this advice, all of these options and to-dos are coming out with the intent of planting seeds that will mature with time. That the intent here is you will be able to build systems, especially virtuous cycles, that will produce the opportunities for it, but they will not guarantee them. Someone has to trust you enough to say this is worth the time, the investment, the attempt. These will not guarantee that they can be made, but they will offer the opportunity greatly for it. Moreover, consider that your actions here, especially as they're put under the heading of agile or trying to serve, may provide the opportunity for someone else to produce the change you wanted to see. And it is valuable to think very hard about whether that's something you're willing to trade for. The world is full of men who wish to sit in the shade of trees. The best men are the ones who are willing to plant the trees in whose shade they know they will never sit.
One, I hit publish. You know, another one says, what did you mean when you said someone will take a bet on me? What would that look like? Who's going to do it? And has it happened to you?
That's a good set of questions. So when I said someone would take a bet on you, that looks like someone offering you an opportunity that maybe is not directly in line with, for example, your role. It might be the opportunity to come and answer questions in a meeting. Now, instead of just being involved with developers, you might be involved with business decision makers, and maybe like some customer representatives, or maybe you're being brought in to advise. That would be someone taking a bet. They're saying, I think you have enough useful knowledge and experience to be valuable to us in this conversation. And so what it would look like for you to help that bet pay off for someone is to be that service, but look for what they are looking for out of the opportunities. Because oftentimes being pulled into a meeting doesn't look like an opportunity, it looks like an inconvenience. But it may be someone putting a bet on you saying, hey, I think Daniel might know. Now, with that answer, what does it look like? Has that happened to me? Yes. In fact, that's why I can say I'm not particularly great at often looking for the answers to say yes, but I'm learning. One of the opportunities came out when I was asking a holistic question as part of requirements gathering, where I asked, so what does this look like for such and such a business process? And they kind of gave me a stare and like, oh no, we hadn't thought of that. And so we had a conversation and a follow-up conversation. And they explained the business process, because I did not place to, but I really was. I did not know. Hey, so I really don't understand how this works. Can you explain it to me from the business? Like, what happens here? And so they explained this whole arc and the kind of things they needed from it. I'm like, okay, it sounds like what you effectively need is a button to capture some extra data and do this. Well, yeah, we'd love that. Okay. And so I spent 30 minutes on PowerPoint and rigged up an example of what that could look like, which formed the basis for a conversation later. And what this eventually turned into was them realizing they had missed something they fundamentally needed. Like, I want to say 10 to 15% of their business went through this process that they had. And by offering my service to ask the questions and then to present an idea of what that could look like, offered them the opportunity to gather what they really needed and expedited the process. Instead of taking the average, which had been like 6 or 8 months to get the information we needed, we were able to get it done in about 2 months. Now, that still felt egregiously long to me. But in hindsight, it was way faster than what they had before. And even when we found some mistakes later, we were able to more rapidly adapt to what they wanted because they just came and talked to me. And so when we started getting down to a time crunch, hey, we don't have everything. How can we get there? I was able to present back to them, well, based upon what I understand you need, here's what I would recommend. Yes, 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 hold on, we actually really need this thing. Oh, okay, then we'll pull that in and we'll shove one other thing out. Yeah, that okay? And it was just a conversation. And then it went through the requirements gathering process. It took about a week to get done, but it came out more or less exactly as we had talked about in the proposal. And it was through the relationships that had been built and the trust of, I know actually what you want because you explained it to me. And I'm able to echo it back to you in the way that we can produce value and code from.
Daniel, we got a couple more coming in. These are both quality questions. How do you advertise that you're open to being bet on? How do you promote this in a workplace without seeming ... like you're trying to be a teacher's pet?
That's a really good question, actually. I never thought about that as the teacher's pet. That's a fun way to think about it. So I would think about it in terms of your personal brand. And this is not a topic that comes up a whole lot, but in the end of the day, you're self-employed. You are agreeing to work with your employer because you signed a contract. But the way in which you deliver that work speaks volumes about your character and your brand. And so my offer here would be the same. How are you doing your work? Are you presenting it in such a way that, like, you have extra capacity? Because especially as, for example, a team lead, that would be one of the things I would look at first. Does this person have the capacity to help more? And even if your team lead's not looking for it, simply asking, hey, I managed to finish this, what's next? Doing that frequently enough, they'll start noticing, wow, you do stuff really fast. Start by behaving in the ways that produce the opportunity, like the ask holistic questions. Start in whatever meetings you're already in. Ask the holistic questions. As you do that frequently, you'll learn better questions to ask. And one day it may come that you ask a question no one else had thought of and they need a answer. And so they'll pull you into the meeting that provides that answer with the person who's there. And now suddenly you've got face recognition or name recognition. Oh, right, you were the guy who caught this. And that builds over time to present an opportunity for you to go and do things. One of the ways that manifested for me, because I was constantly asking the extra questions and offering different designs, was eventually they said, hey, look, we trust you to do what you're doing and you've got enough experience here. Would you lead one of our teams? Okay. Was I actively going and seeking, trying to become a team lead for this client? No, I mean, I wanted to grow there, but I wasn't saying I want to serve you as a team lead, make me a team lead. I was out saying, how can I do the best job I can for you? And when one day when one of their existing team leads had to take vacation, I made certain the team kept going and still completed my work. As I mentioned, I busted my butt to get things done. That's some of what it looked like. I wasn't out there trying to steal the opportunities. I was waiting for someone inside their group to have need and then to seek to serve it. And as that happened, they wanted to present me more opportunities to serve at higher capacities. I didn't have to project it. I just behaved it. Now, if you're worried about becoming a teacher's pet, there are ways to modulate this from being super public to being quiet and private. And so think about how it will be interpreted when you go to ask a question. For example, I don't ask for work commonly during stand-up because oftentimes I'll have my assignments already, but I'll finish it midday and then I'll go privately to the team lead and ask, hey, what should I be working on next? Is this the right priority? And it's small conversations, subtle things that don't have to have it focus on me, which is what can produce the teacher's pet result. The goal will be to do it softly, kindly, because the goal is it's not focused on me. It's always on how can I be of service? And if we behave in that way, I think you'll create the opportunities without incurring the downside.
You know, we have one more question, and I want to applaud the person who submitted this, but I can really relate to this. I bet you many Agilists or anybody can relate to this. At what point would you give up and update the old resume when senior or executive leadership keeps forcing the old ways, even when shown that agility can be successful? They followed up with, or worse, if they penalize your efforts.
Yeah, that, as much as I want to admit it, that is one of the areas where we don't want to have to look. But let's start with the basics. I'd mentioned, for example, that you're self-employed because you agreed to sign the contract. the way in which you work will speak volumes. Because I'll bet you if you're in an organization that truly is like that, you're not the only one who sees it. And people are very keen to watch what leadership does with the efforts of people, because it sets the bar for how far they're willing to go. And they'll remember, how did you behave? Were you still the light? Were you still joyful to try and be around, even though people were beating on you day and night? That behavior is something I still recommend. And as you get and have had experience and have had practice, and you continue to see that the bets aren't being taken because they're not interested, realize that the service you want to provide may not be what they want to buy from you. And that will cause a tremendous amount of angst, either being an anger or sorrow or feeling of loss. And that's okay. But realize that it may never have been that they thought they were buying that from you. And so the anger, at least, don't turn it to them. Don't turn it on yourself. Let go. What is what it was. And now we are on the moment of having opportunity. Now, I do not recommend quit at the first sign of a challenge, because I don't think that gets you where you want. You need to be the common voice. But it comes down to whether you think the trade-off is worth it. I told you it took me, call it a year and a half, maybe 2 years, before the client I'm working with right now started trying to take those bets with me. That's a long time to wait. I mean, I'm an impatient guy sometimes, but I thought it was worth the attempt because I knew that the ground was fertile, even if it was currently barren. And you're going to have to make the same call when you get to that level. And if you're starting to feel burnt out, that's almost certainly a sign of slow down. You don't have to get there today. And if you're burning too hard and getting too much loss, take a step back. Look at what has become tied up in that. Is your identity suddenly your ability to make other people change? That's not a good place to find your identity or your value in. And take that step back to ask, why am I doing this? I had said before, don't make the statement, how may I be of service, if you're not willing to back it up. And so kind of take those steps back to look at yourself first and say, am I in the right heart for this? And if the answer is no, make the adjustment. That may be why your changes weren't coming, because people can kind of see, I don't really think that's what you're after. But if your heart is in the right place and you're tired and you do not see that there is a change possible, okay. Now you've evaluated your position and have come to a reasonable conclusion that yes, now may be a good time to go and leave. Because remember, it's the opportunities to provide the service. And you've probably provided a ton of services to the people already, and they will remember. But the organizational leadership may not want to go that way. Part of service will be to recognize that and say, okay, that is not the service you want. Now your choice is, are you willing to provide the service they do want or no? And if the answer is no, polish your resume, find a better fit for you culturally. If the answer is yes, I'm willing, you have your answers. Continue to provide it in the best possible way. Just realizing that some of the dreams you had for producing significant agility in the organization may not come about. There may be opportunity in the future, but it boils down to that. Are you willing to offer the service they truly want to buy? So we're at about 5 minutes left in the presentation, and I thank you deeply for those questions. I want to close by reminding you that all it takes is a single drop of rain to raise the level of the sea. Many drops together raise it more, but remember, every effort counts, even if only a little bit. And we're looking for that incremental growth. Just keep in mind, Rome wasn't built in a day, and you're not going to get there tomorrow, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that your efforts were worthless, because the change in you will be worth its weight in gold. But it's going to take time. Lead yourself first, because that's the only one you have. And as you develop your capability to lead yourself well, people will start to ask you questions. Why are you like that? How did that happen? Start showing them what you see. Start sharing with them. This will build those relationships and increase the capacity for someone to be willing to take a bet on you. And as you do that, Create that virtuous and consistent cycle of service to the other, always focusing on the value you bring to them rather than on what you want. And the organization can begin to shift and grow around you. Even if it doesn't shift and grow in the ways that you hope, you will have provided a positive impact in the people you work with, and especially on the organization you work for, to do so. I have a couple of blog posts here, and of course, I recommend you go take a look at the Agile Manifesto. But for additional reading as you come to it, I'm also available if you have interest in questions. Just find me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to have a chat. Now, before you go, and I have your attention for a moment longer, I want to let you know that one of my buddies from Improving is going to be giving another Lunch and Learn next week. His name is Claudio La Sala. He is fantastic and a ton of fun to listen to as he speaks. And he'll be talking on refactoring test codes. And so most developers have heard of like this red-green refactor thing as part of the TDD process. Some of us never get to the refactor part. Some only refactor the production code because, you know, it's the production code. But we leave the test code. After all, it's just tests. The tests become cluttered, they're hard to read, maintain, and eventually we just dump them because they're nasty. So this talk, he's going to focus on some ways to refactor the test code, both in a variety of languages, C#, Java, and TypeScript, unit and integration, and even the end-to-end testing, so that they become easy to read, maintain, and then create the opportunities for the better collaboration with some of our non-technical friends to produce the kind of value that we're talking about here in producing agility and good service. And so if you have time next week on the 12th of March, I strongly encourage you, go give them a look.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's virtual Lunch and Learn with Daniel. Thank you for sharing, helping your waterfall flow faster. The recording of this session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the session from Improving's virtual events page. As a reminder, all of our virtual events are recorded and shared for your convenience. And while you're at the virtual events page, I want to make note, two of my favorite improvers are doing Lunch and Learns coming up. Daniel's already mentioned that on the 12th, Claudio La Sala is presenting a Lunch and Learn titled Refactoring Test Code. And in mid-April, we have the one and only Ty Crockett delivering a Lunch and Learn you'll not want to miss, especially if you're into Scrum. It's called Scrum Has Changed. Hope you all have a wonderful and safe weekend.